On this episode, we travel to Sydney, Australia. We learn about tactical urbanism. We see an example of tactical urbanism at a Better Block event. Victoria Walks promotes walking for all ages. The walking volunteers work to connect Sydney's Foreshore walking network. Finally, we go along on the Seven Bridges Walk around Sydney Harbour. Stay tuned.
We're in Sydney talking with Lucinda Hartley with Co-Design Studio. What is Co-Design Studio?
We're a placemaking consultancy based out of Melbourne, Australia, and we help local communities and governments create low-cost improvements to streets and public spaces.
Okay, what is tactical urbanism?
Yeah, so tactical urbanism is a citizen-led approach to neighbourhood building that involves low-cost, low-risk experiments that then drive long-term strategic change.
So what would an example of a low-cost, low-risk experiment be?
Yeah, for example, you might turn a street into a park or a vacant lot into a community centre, but you might do that by experimenting with the trials. So first closing the street for a day, perhaps rolling out AstroTurf or painting the street. So you get a sense of how it could be for a very low cost, low risk experiment. And then you can measure the impact of how that space is used and use that evidence to build either further closures of that street, or maybe it didn't work, so you might try something else.
Where'd the idea of tactical urbanism get started? I mean, how long has it been around?
Well, in fact, the concept is not new at all. In 1985 in central Melbourne, there was a public artist who rolled out turf across the main retail street. But that experiment, even though it was an art installation, actually catalysed a citizen movement to permanently close the main street in Melbourne to traffic. And it was closed in 1992 for the first time, but not in fact permanently closed until 2011. So it's not a new concept, but I think what is interesting is the proliferation of these projects, not just in Australia, but around the world. In fact, we see most of the examples in the United States and Europe. And what that proliferation says, I think, is that we have a range of citizens who are interested to be more involved in shaping their neighbourhoods and cities, and this offers them a tool to do it. The reason it's expanding so fast is because we have the internet, so we can have peer-to-peer learning and sharing, where traditionally any growth in cities has been led by experts and more top-down.
So what's the role of the individual or the local group and the local government in having all this happen?
So everyone has a role to play. We see tactical urbanism projects that are led by citizens, where there are groups of people who see a need in their neighbourhood, and rather than going through a long-term process where they're knocking on council's door, they just get out there and do something about it. That's a really powerful way to communicate a message. We equally see it being used by city governments who want to have a more interactive, participatory tool to with which to engage with residents or to have a two-way conversation with the public. In Australia in particular, we see a lot of tactical projects that are led by governments, but they're collaborative and they involve communities. We also see tactical urbanism being used by experts to experiment with ideas, so urban designers or planners experiment with ideas before any solid commitment is made. And interestingly, we now actually see it also being used by property developers, either to make better use of vacant lots that they own, or to create early activation or some sort of presence in a new community from day one.
What do you see as the future for tactical urbanism?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about tactical urbanism, as opposed to any other city building movement that we've seen before, is that it can be led by anyone. Any traditional sort of urban planning movements, such as modernism, garden city, even the car-oriented sprawl, has traditionally been led by experts and governments. What I think the fundamental difference, and why I think tactical urbanism isn't just a trend and perhaps has some legacy for the future, is that it actually represents a different way of city making that can be shared peer-to-peer, that it can be picked up just as easily by a city government as it can by your neighbour. So with the future, I think it could have a few different opportunities. It may possibly point towards even a different kind of democratic future for cities on the one extreme. On the other extreme, it provides us with a more effective community engagement tool for governments to use. But all along that spectrum, there are a number of advantages that point towards a more collaborative way of creating neighbourhoods.
And it's not just local government that needs to be involved in this, it's all three levels of government.
We're in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, Australia, talking with Sam George with the Park to Pacific Association. What is Park to Pacific?
Park to Pacific is a community group that formed following last year's Better Block event, and the idea is to reimagine this stretch of road that links from Centennial Park to the Pacific Ocean. It's got 8 villages, 130 businesses, and last year's event was in the village to the east, and this year we're holding this event here, and we're just showcasing what could be done to this street to make it more greener, more safer, more interesting, more art, more colour, and more sociable.
Okay, you mentioned Better Block, which is what's going on today. What is Better Block?
Well, Better Block is a one-day demonstration event, I guess, that can show some of the techniques and some of the things we can do to make the streets better. We've got trees, we've got these parklets, we've got art murals happening, we've got live music, we've got the businesses bringing their activities out onto the footpath, and we've got the community and everyone coming on board to basically come and really celebrate, meet each other, strengthen the community ties, strengthen the business ties, and do everything we can to make it a more people place, a more human street and safer.
And the park on the one end of the street, what's that park like?
So Centennial Park, it's one of the largest urban parks in Sydney. And it's a beautiful park. It's really popular with cyclists and walkers, and it's only a short distance to the beach and some of the most amazing beaches. But the stretch of road that links the two could always be improved and can always be better, to encourage people just to use walking and cycling as a mode of transport between the two, which is a lot more sustainable and friendly for the community.
And who owns the road? What level of government has to be involved to make the sort of changes you'd like to see?
Well, we made our lives a bit difficult. The road is jointly managed between the local council and the state government because of the hierarchy of this road. As you can see, there's buses. It's quite a major link, so we've had to negotiate with both the local government and the state government transport authorities to make this day happen, in terms of traffic management, etc. So it is much harder than just doing a regular local neighbourhood street, but it's one of the most direct links, and it's a key thoroughfare. So we're really interested in making positive changes to a major road.
And besides planning for your third Better Block event a year from now, how else do you build off of what's going on today to start advancing these changes you'd like to see?
Well, we're doing a lot of surveys of the community and the businesses, so we can get a clear understanding of the support from the community of the different initiatives and what things people like, what they don't like, any future things they'd like to see or things they don't want to see again. And then we're putting together a report to the council to give this feedback and then to lobby for permanent changes. A lot of these things are just for the one day, but we're hoping that in the future they can become permanent. We're also putting together a toolkit so that other communities can do this in other areas to help them be easier for other community groups to be empowered and bring changes to their street. So we're working at the policy level as well as the demonstration level.
So if I was to come back 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what would you like to be able to show me?
Well, hopefully these trees that are just temporary are permanently in the ground. Hopefully the traffic is permanently slower. Hopefully we see a lot more art and colour on the footpaths and on the walls, and just a general stronger community vibe on the street. We see more people, more pedestrians, we see more cyclists. That's sort of the best we can hope for.
We're in Sydney talking with Ben Rossiter with Victoria Walks. What is Victoria Walks?
We're a walking health promotion body. We were established in 2009 by Vic Health, the Victorian Health Promotion Foundation, and we work to get more Victorians, the state of Victoria, up and walking. So we do, a lot of statewide leadership, the sort of advocacy, submissions, and media profile, research and evidence-based issues relating to walking. We also support communities to make their neighbourhoods more walkable, and we promote walking and have walking events. So we're pretty widespread, and we have a current staff of about 4.
What's sort of the bottom end? Children, what can you do to get more children walking?
Yeah, which is the big one. I think that's the holy grail of any walking promotion fund, of how we can get kids walking to school. We've developed a range of resources on our website under the Smart Steps banner, and that's really how we can embed walking in school curriculum. So for example, we have lesson plans in all primary years in maths, science, history and English, so for teachers to deliver their curriculum by going for a walk. Or there's things like quite a big walkability class projects. We've got classes might do a term or year project where they audit areas of the neighbourhood, and then getting the school students to lead the advocacy to make their neighbourhood more walkable, like addressing speed or routes to school, pavements and that sort of thing. So really giving kids that leadership in the walkability area as well.
Do kids react well to that? Do they latch on to something when they're given...
Well, we know that, I think everyone knows kids want to walk. They want to walk and they want to do it with their friends. And they also, as they get older, they want to walk independently, which is something increasingly in Western countries we're denying them, particularly in English-speaking countries. We excel in, denying kids the opportunity to walk to school. So, yes, it's something they want to do. But they also, going back to that leadership, they also want to do things. They want to make a difference in their community. So that's something that's really encouraging. And for us, it's about, how can we build, lifelong habits that they can, really carry in through their life about walking, and connection to their community, because it's much the same thing.
Other end of the spectrum, senior citizens, elderly population is growing. What can you do there?
Yep. We've last year we released a major study, which is the biggest of its kind ever conducted in Australia, and I haven't seen anything quite similar around the world, which is looked at barriers and enablers to walking, and these are available on our website, the full report, which is 160 pages or a summary. But looking at how can we get kids, seniors walking, and we did a international literature review, focus groups. But also some secondary analysis of existing government transport data, and we also surveyed 1,128 seniors about barriers and enablers, including 110 over the age of 80. So it has a richness to the data you don't often see. I think often people assume too much about seniors and think they know, but they have some quite specific needs. And in Australia, although it's the most common form of physical activity, seniors we have low rates of walking. About 14% of our over 65s, about 14% of their trips are on foot. And that compares pretty ordinary to, say, European countries. I think Germany, it's about 35% of trips, or 38% on foot. But once they get to over 75 years of age, it's 48% on trips. So, from Australia, the challenge is it's not about functional decline, getting old and frail. It's about providing walkable environments. And if you do, they will, and they want to.
What sort of things did you find out that seniors wanted or needed but weren't always available?
Yeah, one of the surprising to many issues around for seniors about looking at what are barriers on an individual level. So apart from having local destinations relevant to their everyday life in walking distance, but things like dogs off leash or not under effective control was a moderate to major barrier to 50% of seniors. Or bikes on shared paths. In Australia, we have embraced shared paths like no other country, so shared walking and cycling paths. And that's a major concern to seniors, because they're overwhelmingly concerned with not falling, slips, trips and falls. So things which surprise them, like even a little yappy dog or a bike just going past that takes their attention away from their feet, is a major concern to them.
And local government, interesting in knowing what they can do to improve things in their town.
Yep.
What sort of resources do you have there?
You were asking some good questions there, John, because we've been pretty busy in that area. We've developed a number of resources over the last couple of years. One is quite a sophisticated guide on how to measure walking in all its facets, because we know from the 79 local governments in Victoria that was a major concern. They know walking's an issue that cuts across all their business and economic and transport and community and health units, but they don't really know what to do. So working with them, how to measure walking, a guide to how to develop walking strategies, quite a sophisticated guide to a vision impaired walking audit tool. And at the moment we're in the process of developing, the first stage of developing age-friendly design guidelines, so what seniors need to support local governments to make walkable environments. Briefly, some of the other things, we have a Walking Maps website, which is walkingmaps.com.au, that a lot of local councils are starting to use to map walks in their council area with photos and points of interest, which really just inspire people to get out and walk, or map transport walks or workplace walks and that sort of thing. So working with councils is extremely important to us and very important, particularly because at the moment in Victoria, unfortunately, our state government's not very engaged in the walking arena, but local councils are, so we're doing a lot of work with them.
And you're developing these resources for Victoria. Do places elsewhere in Australia find them useful as well?
Yeah, definitely. The school resources, some of them are particularly mapped to existing Victoria curriculum, but a lot of them are adaptable and are being used by, we know that some of the resources in secondary school, getting secondary school geography students to audit and take action in their neighbourhood is picked up by other states. But we also know that the developing walking strategy, the measuring walking, they're applicable beyond Victoria. So we know they've been downloaded and used around the country, and I think some of them internationally are relevant. So we'd encourage international colleagues and people interested to have a look, because hopefully they should be of great use to them.
And Victoria, you got the major city, Melbourne.
Yep.
What's the rest of it like for someone who's never been there?
Well, it's a great city. Australia's a wonderful country, like every country. Victoria, the majority of people do live in Melbourne, and Melbourne's a city that has a wonderful walkable centre, getting increasingly more walkable, but it's a city that is typified by urban sprawl. So the middle and outer areas, in fact the outer newer suburbs, and we continue to grow out into the suburbs, into good agricultural land. We tend to plant houses, not crops. So we're going out further, and there's really concerns about the walkability. They're really car-dependent neighbourhoods and communities where people are caught in what we call transport poverty, forced car ownership in the middle and outer suburbs. In the regional areas, some of them we have higher levels of walking than the outer areas of Melbourne, but increasingly a lot of those are having their own version of sprawl. But I think going back, that a lot of councils are really looking to how they can address the issues. Challenges for them is our state and federal governments really aren't valuing walking, and they really need to start investing in walking and walkability and supporting local governments and communities to increase the levels of walking, particularly because of the economic imperative involved in the importance of doing that.
And the economic imperative.
Yep.
What's the impact of not being walkable?
Yep.
What as you go forward into the future, what can walking do for the economy and for budgets?
A number of different levels, and just in terms of health budget, in Australia, 63% of Australian adults are now overweight or obese. And 25% are kids, which in my generation was about 5%. So, the drain, I think the obesity and related diseases, it costs the Australian economy I think it's about $68 billion a year. It's a lot of money. But in economics, we know from around the world and locally that people who walk to their local shops go more frequently, stay longer, and spend more money than those who drive. So it's about the economic health of a local community. And then economics in cities, and the City of Melbourne's done some great research looking at the value of the walking economy and how important it is for businesses, big, medium, small, to conduct their daily business. For people to get around. It's about the agglomeration economy, the benefits of being, having businesses in one area, and walkability is the key ingredient in that. So they can share ideas, they can have informal meetings, steal ideas, all those sort of things that businesses tend to do. And walkability is important. The City of Melbourne's draft walk plan, they've sort of done a sophisticated, I've said that a few times, but quite a complex economic analysis, and in that sort of found if they improve the walking connectivity in the City of Melbourne, the CBD, by about 10%, the possible impact on the economy is $2.1 billion. So it's enormous impact that walkability can have on not just retail economies, not just on health budgets and individual health, but on the economy as a whole.
We're in Sydney talking with Phil Jenkin with Walking Volunteers. What is the Walking Volunteers?
It's an experienced group of walkers who have spent the last 10 years mapping, thinking about and then finally developing the whole of the Foreshore walking route in Sydney. 315 kilometres of fantastic walking.
Okay. What are those shores that you're walking along?
Well, it starts at the north at Palm Beach, Barrenjoey Lighthouse, part of National Park, and then it goes down to North Head, the entrance to Sydney Harbour, all the way out west to Parramatta, the earliest town in Australia, back to South Head and then down into the Royal National Park, the second oldest national park in the world.
Okay, and so tell us, what is it like walking the whole length of the thing?
Well, it's the most incredible experience. Of course, we don't say everybody should walk the whole lot of it. What we say is there is the route. That is what you might want to do over a period of time, or you might want to do it over weekends, staying along the way. But basically, people want to come down and walk for 30 minutes, walk for a couple of hours between a ferry stops or up to a train station using public transport. And really, some of the walking here in Sydney, in fact, the foreshores of Sydney are internationally known as being some of the best urban walking in the world.
So it's what's the scenery like?
Well, the scenery on the northern beaches, that's Palm Beach down to Manly, is rugged headlands, wonderful bush tracks around the headlands through the bush, dropping down onto lagoons and beaches, some of the best beaches in the world. And it's a mix, and staying, of course, having a coffee along the way and going to a cafe and really meeting lots of interesting people. It is incredibly good walking. And then when you turn inland, you're going into the harbour, one of the 16 national landscapes now of Australia, into Sydney Harbour and the coast. And it is fantastic walking. Bays, little bays, national park, walking through bush. It's just an incredible experience.
And then after you've gone up the bay and you're heading back down, what more are you going to see?
Well, if you go up to Parramatta, walking the Parramatta River, the oldest river in Australia in the sense of European occupation, if I can use that word, you just go from ferry stop to ferry stop, basically. You can stay on Cockatoo Island, which is a great place to stay, and then just feed out the next day into a different part of the river.
So what's the history of this trail? What did it take to get it done?
Well, what happened was over many years, parts of it were done, in a sense, by local councils and government authorities and national parks. But of course, each particular landowner looked at it from their own perspective, and they were not linked up. There was no known walk to cover the lot, and everybody said, "Oh, come down to my little patch, and that's fantastic." And so it was, but there was no interconnection. And of course, most of the punters who go walking don't want to just stay in one particular council area. They want to walk from that headland to this ferry stop because it's such a fabulous walk. That might go through 2 councils, it might go through national parks. But you don't think of it that way. You're just blown away by the experience.
So so people get to it, ferry stops, train stations. Are there feeder trails that would bring you in from the people that might live just a 10-minute walk away from it?
The walking is so good in Sydney because of its harbour and its river systems. And so they feed right into the city, right out west, up and down the coast. You've got these incredible harbours and bays. And so what happens is that there are ferry stops along those. On the northern beaches there's a major road just behind the beaches and sand dunes. So you've always got access to public transport. So what we say to people is, if you want to enjoy a walk, don't take your car. Just use public transport. It is quicker and better.
What sort of improvements would you like to see happen to the trail and its environments in the future?
Look, we're a long way down the path. It's been launched by the Premier. It's been the inaugural walk's taken place, but we could still do much better on the quality of the track, and the government needs to really focus on that with councils. Finding your way can always be improved, wayfinding. So there's quite a lot that still needs to be done. And the other thing is that governments and the community and council should all get together. We should have one body in Sydney, call it New South Wales Walks that concentrates on walking and getting up the major trails in New South Wales so that we can be known as the best state in Australia for walking.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.
So what have you got in it? My baby girl. Holy.